Okay, I think we've got all the committee. I think we got all the committee people here. And Ben, maybe you can do roll call here and see who we've got.
Sure, happy to. Okay, so it's 6:06 p.m. on December 11th, 2023. This is a meeting of the Charter Review Commission's Legislative and Oversight Committee. We have tonight from the committee, Victor Tervala, Kathy Christian, Roger Hartley, Davon Love, Julianne Montes de Oca, Matt Stegman, Emily Levy, and other members of the commission include Andy Ellis and Josh Harris.
Okay,
Great. And let me say right off the bat, thank you guys for being here at 6 o'clock. It's a drag, I know, but it's something that needs to be done. So thank you very much for showing up.
Let me go over the attendance again. So
Sure.
Emily Levy, Davon Love, Kathy Christian, Roger Hartley, is that all the committee members, and Victor?
I think it is. It's me, Roger Hartley, Davon Love, Julianne Montes de Oca, Kathy Christian,
Okay.
Matt Stegman, and Emily Levy.
Can Julianne spell her last name for me, because it's only coming up with an initial?
MONTES space DE space OCA, Montes de Oca.
Excellent. Okay. Okay. And so far we have no members of the public gathered at this point. Is that correct still?
That's correct.
Okay. Let's make sure at the end of the meeting, whenever that may occur, but no later than 7:45, make sure that we'll come back and see if there's any members of the public who joined us and who would like to speak at this point.
Okay.
So, okay, so we've got an agenda, but we've also added something. Erin O'Keefe, a commissioner member, has suggested, we put it on her last week, or the week, I guess it was last week, to draft something about committee reports, and she did. And that was provided via email somewhere around 4:30. And I don't think Erin's not with us, so I would like to talk about it briefly. I'll read what's there. It's draft guide for Charter Review Committee reports. Her idea is this is to be mailed to committees for review and approval after the committee meeting, and then provided to the General Commission in advance of succeeding commission meetings. So then she has a list of things that she is proposing that we put on each one of our committee reports: the name of the committee, the date, time of the meeting, the chair, the list of committee members, and any visitors present. I think all of that stuff is basically in our minutes anyhow. So there's nothing new there except maybe visitors present. I don't know if we typically, hello, Mr. Vice Chair.
Good evening.
Reverend Little, good. I'm glad you can join us. So I think most of the beginning material is stuff we would normally have in the minutes, except perhaps the names of visitors present. And I don't know if there is a ban or a bar of some sort that we can't list the visitors. I suspect not. So then the next thing she has is one sentence summary statement of the meeting's purpose. And in this particular case, it would be to explore Article 3 and the activities of the city council. And then her next thing would be a summary, provide overview of bullet points of the main points of discussion, which once again, I think that would be normally in the minutes, including factual information, which I don't think typically would be. Conclusions drawn, any motions, any formal recommendations, and any recommended actions. And then she has notes specifically anything that was agreed upon or disagreed upon by the majority of the committee. So I think those are fine. Let me tell you that I'm hoping that we don't have, I'm not in this particular committee, I don't want any final conclusions drawn or any really particular motions other than, leaving or adjourning, that kind of stuff, or any formal recommendations. I really just want to listen to ideas for a while, and then we'll decide formally what will go on. But to the extent that when we do get to that, it seems reasonable that the recommendations, and they would all be part of the minutes as I would understand that. And I'll have staff correct me if that's not true. But I think if you take a look, and Ben or any staff member who deals with these things, is there anything in the summary that Commissioner O'Keefe has that would be problematic to provide or out of the ordinary to provide?
It seems acceptable.
These are my favorite colors.
Vic, I was gonna say that some of it, you need to be quiet, buddy. That some of the things like the conclusions drawn, that may be a little difficult to capture,
Yeah.
but I guess all we can do is give it our best shot.
Yeah, I mean,
I can handle that.
say that again, Richard?
I can handle that.
Yeah. Okay, good. I mean, I think in general, we normally capture this information, maybe not in the detail that maybe Commissioner O'Keefe would want, but I think, as I understand it, the way she would like to have this happen is that once we have a draft, it would be circulated to the committee members. The committee members would take a look, and if they want to add, subtract, whatever it would be, then we'd do that. And then we would get clean what the committee wants, and then we would send it to the rest of the commission. But typically, that would be in the minutes. Now, and once again, going back to Ben and to staff, this is a committee. It's a subcommittee. It's not a legal group. It's only an offshoot. We don't have the Open Meetings Act applying to this unless we have a quorum of our commission, as I understand it. Is that correct?
Correct.
So will we normally take minutes at these meetings, at these committee meetings?
So you're not required to technically if this meeting is not going to be subject to OMA, but what I'd be curious to get Hillary's input in is if you are inviting the public, as we did tonight, by providing public notice, both on our own website and also through Legistar, which is the city council's means of providing public notice, then does that trigger necessarily all the other things that would go with a regular open meeting? And we can just perform as if those rules apply tonight to make sure that we are in compliance and we can get clarification and follow up.
Okay. Well, but what you expect. I've got the attendees. I can it's on a discussion. As it gets more involved than I'm expecting, there's only going to be a couple of papers. Both know my work, and I don't waste words. So yeah.
Okay.
I've been called up.
Let's get Hillary. Let's get the law department to opine on this. But I think in general we should be able to do this, and this sounds like a great idea. So we are basically Unless there's some bar to it, which I can't imagine there isn't. Let's assume that we're taking meetings and we're putting in this kind of detail in those minutes.
Okay,
And we'll play around with it in the committee and send it out when we're done.
I can do that this time, but when I get it done soon tomorrow, who should I send it to?
Well, why don't we send it to all the committee members, this particular committee member, all these members.
I'll make my notes, but I want to send it to either you or.
Yeah, why don't you send it to me and I'll send it out.
Okay.
So that'll be easy. You don't have to bother with that.
Okay.
And
And there's
Reverend Little,
also, I see, well, I did.
Richard, are you still speaking?
Yes, I'm looking because I saw, oh, okay, we do have a, call in, now. Charm TV was on earlier, so I assume there's gonna be a tape, we can check.
Can the call-in user with the phone number starting with 410830 go ahead and just state for the minutes their name?
Do it now. Okay, if somebody can unmute them,
They can unmute themselves because they're a panelist.
okay.
But it's more likely than not, it's just somebody using their phone to assist with hearing. So, Josh, can you unmute yourself?
Yeah, and you fixed it. Thanks. Sorry, I just looked up and saw it. So.
Yeah, you're good. And then Reverend Little, your hand is raised as well.
Good evening. I was just going to offer that it looks like that we're not recording, but if we recorded this, then that would cover us if we needed to have minutes, if we found out that we needed to have minutes.
So this is actually being covered by Charm TV right now. Michael Wells, you'll see his email address logged in.
He was on, but I don't see him on now, so I don't know if they're staying with it or.
He is. Okay. If we can wrap up the call and in terms of taking attendance, move forward to actual agenda items, that'd be useful.
Attendance is, I can give you the bullet points tomorrow and you can check it against the tape and send it out.
Okay. Victor, if you want to move on to other agenda items.
Okay.
Yeah, that'll be great. Reverend, you're going to be talking to about this in your own committee and trying to adopt what we're trying to adopt in this particular committee. Ideally, we would have a uniform reporting procedure through all the committees, but this is going to be up to you to sort of spearhead it through your committee and see what happens. Okay.
Okay, so Victor, you're on the briefing section of the agenda.
Okay, the briefing section. Well, the briefing section. Are we talking about actions, next steps? Are we still walking on that?
No, the briefing is outline of the city council and legislative branch.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. So at this point, we wanted to have an outline of that, and I think Ben, you were gonna do that, as I understand. Okay, we can't hear you.
I'm happy to do a quick rundown.
Okay, terrific.
So the Baltimore City Council, as it exists in its current form, is made up of 15 members. There are 14 districts within the city. The 15th member is the council president, who is elected at large. The city council is empowered in large part with lawmaking authority here in Baltimore City. And with that comes a broad array of subjects that they can cover. There are certain limitations to that legislative authority. I think one of the major recent conversations around this legislative authority has been their involvement in the budget process. Mr. Stegman could probably offer greater detail on this conversation, but I'll do my very best, if only to say that up until the last fiscal year, the city council previously only had the authority to reduce levels of appropriations within the ordinance of estimates as proposed by the mayor and subsequently approved by the Board of Estimates. As of fiscal year 2024, and now in the planning year for fiscal year 2025, when the budget is introduced on the floor of the council, the city council may now, working within the total sum of monies appropriated as proposed by the mayor, may either move money in between particular service lines, they may increase or decrease or altogether cut. They can also create entirely new lines of appropriation. The baseline rule remains that there may not be any increase to the overall sum of appropriations within the ordinance of estimates. So they're working with the same pot of money. They can move it around as they see fit effectively. The way that this panned out last year is that the council president effectively sought to drive all budget amendments through his office to varying degrees of success. And there were certain changes made, but the details of that are not necessarily important. The council president within the current structure of the council has a lot of authority. I will say it is it is unique, and I think Mr. Hartley, or Dr. Hartley, excuse me, can provide greater examples of the relative uniqueness of having an at-large council president versus having a council president elected from among the members of the council itself. So, for example, in Baltimore County, which I believe currently has 7 council members, every year they elect a different council president. It happens to have been Julian Jones for the past 3 years consecutively, but it need not be the case. So in this instance, Council President Mosby is elected at large, as is the mayor, as is the comptroller. The council president establishes their own committees. There are certain committees in the council which are required by law. The Legislative and Oversight Committee is one of those. A point of conversation for this group, I think, probably will ultimately be the degree of oversight that the city council has over any number of different city powers or city actions. Again, within the realm of either appropriations or within the realm of, say, what an audit would explore or something to that effect. Beyond that, I will say that there are city council rules that govern more day-to-day procedure and other quirks of our particular body. Those council rules are established by the council at the beginning of each session, which each session runs 4 years, and the elections align now on presidential election years. Previously, they have not. Those rules are enforceable by the council members themselves and are not otherwise enforceable by, say, the law department or members of the public or anything like that. So violations of them, people can be shamed, but they can't actually be necessarily, nothing else can come of it particularly. Because Mr. Stegman previously worked for this current council president, I'm curious if you'd have any additions, or if Richard Krummerich, who serves council services, who's been with the city for many a moon, may also have any additions.
Only thing I would say, in this administration, the law department has told the council that certain actions they took were invalid because of violation of council rules.
Good. How about Matt? Do you have something to add to?
No, not at this time. I think that was fairly thorough.
Are there questions for Ben? Ben, thank you. Nice job. Are there questions for Ben about what he just got through talking about? I see your hands up, Reverend. I'm going to talk to you. We'll get to you in a minute. Okay. Reverend, you have something to say? Hands down.
No, no, Mr. Chairman, my hand was still up from the previous time. I just took it down. Thank you.
Thank you.
I do have a question.
Mhm.
So, and as I've been, looking through the binder and just kind of getting my head around, our role here, I know the question I'm about to ask actually bleeds into some of the executive function. But one of the things that in the charter is pretty explicit is that the Board of Estimates has the sole authority as it relates to allocation of resources, like post the budget being passed. Like the city council doesn't have the authority to, to allocate resources. And so my question, if you can just talk more about that, because like like when you think about the federal government, the Congress produces the budget, right? President has to, approve it. Whereas here, the executive is given the function of producing the budget, and the legislature is more, confirming the budget. So I just if you could talk more about that and what I'm getting at is wanting to decentralize power of the budget outside of the executive. So that's ultimately, what I'm trying to get at. So if you could talk through some of what I just mentioned in that context.
So under Article 6 of the Charter, which discusses the Board of Estimates, matters of appropriation start and for the most part end with the Ordinance of Estimates, with the city budget. Amounts not appropriated within the Ordinance of Estimates within that budget process, so something that would be called a supplementary appropriation, may be initiated in the legislative body. There are 3 different flavors of supplementary appropriations, and we can get into the details of those, but there are also degrees of approval that would be required for the movement of monies depending on where they are located in the budget. And I'm going to try and give the most basic examples. So if within my department, the Department of Legislative Services, we have 2 service lines. We have one called Legislative Services, and we have one called Archives and Records Management. If I want to move money around in my first bucket in Legislative Services, I can do that. Department of Finance can help me do that. That is fine. If I want to move money between my 2 buckets, I need Board of Estimates approval. If I want to move money, or if somebody else wants to move money from my entire agency to another agency, they need Councilmatic approval. If you want to move money from the rainy day fund, a bucket of monies that are otherwise not appropriated to a specific line in the budget, you would need Board of Estimates approval and Councilmatic approval.
With a supermajority.
Correct. So just those are the kind of the basic requirements. As your question puts it well, you're correct. The authority to originate the budget does sit with the city's executive in the mayor. And I would have agreed with you before last fiscal year that they are the, be all end all of that authority. However, with the change in the charter permitting the city council to move monies in, around, up, down, all around within the Ordinance of Estimates, that power has been in large part been kind of stripped away from the mayor in terms of being really the chief decision maker. While it is certainly easier to shape a budget before it's made public, those kind of political realities of when you have access to that document, it still is technically feasible for them to do as much or as little to the budget as the mayor does when they introduce it.
Yeah, that makes sense. If I can follow up. So that makes sense. I think, your point around the change where the council now has more ability to impact the budget. What about in the instance where there are state dollars or federal dollars where the intention is for the council. So instead of the executive, you think about large sums of money that might come to Baltimore, right? So let's say, you know, during the uprising back in 2015, there was a lot of money that came to Baltimore, and, you know, monies that went to, you know, federal dollars, right, that would go to Baltimore City. And traditionally, the executive would be able to just determine where those resources would go, right? If monies came from the city or came from the federal government or from the state. In an instance where the desire would be for the executive not to exercise sole control over the distribution of federal or state dollars, is there anything to the charter that speaks to the ability for those decisions to be made outside of the context of the executive being able to determine where those resources go?
So in general, the receipt of federal, state, or grant monies has to be accepted by the city, because oftentimes those monies require a certain amount of matching funds. And so from a fiscal perspective, the Board of Estimates has to effectively say, okay, yes, we will take these monies because we can support that with our matching fund. Absent the matching fund, they still have to approve the acceptance of those monies. So the BOE is involved, but I'll say that that's not necessarily a counterpoint to what you just said, that the mayor is expressing basically their opinion, because the mayor holds a supermajority on the Board of Estimates through themselves, the city solicitor, and the director of the Department of Public Works. Speaking of, say, like ARPA funds that came in most recently to the city in a huge way, the Department of Finance chose to appropriate those monies to a unique service line which is called the Office of Recovery. I'm shortening that name, I think, a little bit. The Office of Recovery from that is empowered to then effectively have sub-grantees, or for monies to then be appropriated from there. The Department of Finance could have chosen to split monies between the service lines, just with different sources of those funds, but the ultimate source of the fund will determine how it may be spent. So with ARPA funds, you can't use it for any number of things. But I'm gonna defer to Dr. Hartley, who had his hand raised earlier.
Well, hold on. Before, I don't want to, we're getting in the weeds of something that another committee has. I mean, ultimately, what this discussion is about is the organization of the city council. Ultimately, when we talk about the powers of the city council, definitely budgetary powers is part of the game. But in this article and in this committee, we're not really touching that, although we can liaise with the finance committee that will be involved with the questions you're asking, Mr. Love. So, all those are really interesting, and I remember. Thanks, Ben, for all of that material. And if somebody else wants to just sort of follow up on that, but I do want to sort of move into our little world of outlining how the city council operates and the matters that are in Article 3.
And that's okay. Ben answered my question about the supermajority. That was my question. So thank you, Ben.
Okay, now if we can, and that really is a nice segue into the next piece of this thing, which is I wanted to hear a discussion among this particular group about ideas that you may be bringing to the table that you would like to see about the organization of the city council, ideas that you want to kick around about perhaps changing, or questions about the organization that may ultimately lead to a different way of charter amendments. And I know we have Andy Ellis, who has provided some material that he would like to talk about. But before we get to Andy, since he's not part of this committee, I did want to have this discussion among committee members. Doctor, you're on. If that's your hand, you're on, Dr. Hartley.
Yeah, thank you so much, and appreciated. I don't know if you received it, and I sent it rather late, everyone, but I put down two ideas that I wanted to share with the committee. I'm aware, too, that these may be seen as, I don't know, for lack of a term, big changes. Let's put it that way. To the charter and to the city, and of course you may or may not support it. I don't know where this would go. One is a bigger change than the other, but I'll start with the so-called easier one first, and that is something that you referred to a little bit earlier, Ben. I wanted to advance an idea that perhaps we change the election of the city council president from an at-large citywide election to one that would be something like we see in other cities and counties, where the council themselves elects their chair from their body. And major change, and I know we're in election season where some really good people are running for election and re-election, so I'm mindful of that as well. And there may be people here who support different individuals for that seat, but the rationale that I wanted to advance on this wasn't just that other cities do it like this and counties do it like this. And by do it like this, I mean elect their president from their own ranks, but also that it creates an interesting quandary in the structure of our government, where we have a council that's elected to represent different parts of the city. And then we have a very strong mayor system. And I would emphasize and underline the very. I mean, in comparison to other systems of government, we have a very, very strong mayor system. On top of that, you add that you elect what is a very powerful city president or council president separately from that body. It means essentially that you have three, if not four sources of power that all tend to battle it out with each other. A mayor, a council president, a council, and a board of estimates that's made up of members of some, if not all of those bodies. Well, actually one missing, frankly, the city council, because the city council president is not elected from the ranks of the city council. So in a sense, the city council, I'll use that as an example, the city council does not have a representative technically on the board of estimates as a result. Not only does it have a super majority. So this is in fact one that I think I wanted to not share with the entire group. I wanted to share only with our committee, because it's one that you all may see as something worth advancing or not worth advancing. It would be worth discussing. The other is a major change to the city government, I'm going to admit, which is number one. We have a very strong very strong mayor system of government. I'll emphasize that. The most popular form of city and county government in the United States is a much more professionally focused model, and that is what is known as the council manager system, where there are mayors. And in some cases, the mayors are indeed elected. In some council mayor systems, the mayor's elected from the city council, but I'm not suggesting that. And the ultimate selection or the ultimate difference is that there is a selection of a professional city manager by that council and that mayor. And that professional city manager can be hired or fired by the council. This is a system that's the most popular system of local government in the United States, and it's a very successful one in very successful cities around the United States. It has a kind of an element to it that is a so-called good government system. And I put down, and again, I didn't go into deep research on this. I just wanted to give you enough information to give you a flavor of what I was suggesting. But, I note a list of advantages of a council manager system. Really appreciated, Reverend Little, that you mentioned that we most recently, under Mayor Scott, advanced a change in city government that allowed the mayor to appoint a city manager or city administrator, which is similar but not the same. as this form of government. This is a form of government that allows most of, if not all of the departments to be run by a professional city manager and and ultimately a government and elected government that works with that professional city manager apart from the day-to-day business doing the work of legislating and executive decision making. So similar, but not exactly the same, but really appreciated. And that was a charter change. You're absolutely right. Thank you for that information too. So anyway, those were two things that I've been thinking about, although I've heard other ideas that are also intriguing. One pretty big change, and the other not as big a change, but probably controversial to some. So I appreciated the opportunity to present them.
Thanks, Dr. Hartley. That's really good. I think the change in the mayoral makeup is really for the people who are dealing. I guess that's Reverend Little's committee. He's dealing with the executive branch. I have to say that I'm very familiar with all the various forms of government because before I had this little work, I did something else for a long period of time. And I gather, as you point out, if we had a mayor under that system, it would be more just a figurehead. It would be the ribbon. He'd be the ceremonial head of the government. He'd be cutting ribbons, doing whatever it would be doing. But essentially, he would just be part of the crowd at that point. And we do have a number of jurisdictions around Maryland that have that. Although most charter counties in Maryland don't have that. They have a strong executive form of government. So any discussion? I think that's both of those are really interesting.
Yeah.
Any discussion on either one of those points from anyone? Please go ahead. Go ahead, Emily.
Oh,
So for the first change you proposed, you mentioned that there's a lot of opposite interests. I was just wondering if we have ever seen that actually at play with anything specific. You know, with what you mentioned, I think 4 or 5 opposite interests, preventing them from getting something done.
yes, we have, Emily. I could come back to that point. The original point I was going to make. If you're going to the chosen by the members system, then you have to look at the number of districts, because if you had you're either going to have 15 single member districts, which is going to involve drawing a new map, or 14 single member districts. You can go with the same map, but then you run the risk of having votes end in ties. The answer to Emily's question, as much as I want to say, is there have been. This is my 11th council president, so like as much as I'll say is there were presidents who could not put together a majority coalition to get things accomplished, and essentially you wound up with the mayor running the council.
Okay. Emily, you have more? Do you have other further follow-up questions? Anything like that?
No, that was helpful. I mean, do we think that having the council president chosen by the members would prevent that? I assume the answer is yes.
You know, it's really an intriguing possibility, and of course, if we were dealing with that in our recommendations, we would have to push it off for 4 years, you know, because we've got an election coming up here, so we'd have to push it off. So that's not a problem. We would just say we could pass it on the ballot, but say it would take effect in 2028, something like that. So it's possible to do it that way if we're interested in doing this. And of course, I think this you know, as the doctor mentioned, this is a popular way of dealing with it. So it's certainly a viable option for us to pursue. Reverend Little, you got your hand up?
Yes, sir. You know, we have watched as Donald Trump and many members of his base have actively worked to dismantle democracy in America. And I would like to think that there's nothing more American than democracy. And by democracy, we mean vesting power with the people. And, you know, while we don't necessarily have Donald Trump level problems in Maryland, we do have a responsibility to make our democracy as strong as possible, in part because the people deserve it, but also as a way to reject attempts at authoritarianism in the United States. This is a very real issue, even with Donald Trump recently saying that he needs to be dictator for just one day. So as we talk about how power is organized and arranged in this city, I want to challenge all of us to be honest with ourselves first and transparent, and also to use a power equity lens when we talk about the distribution of power and how we organize power. I can just tell you all that as a Black person sitting here listening to this conversation, the idea that the articulation that the city council president is not actually a member of the city council and therefore should be in some ways, that position should be changed. It just sounds very much like an effort to diminish Black political power. The city council president is very much a member of the city council. As has been stated here, the city council president is elected at large by all of the members, all the voters of Baltimore City to be part of the city council. He's not vice mayor who presides over the council. He is elected, or she would be elected, as part of the council. And, you know, I want to challenge us as we review this charter to do two things. As our chairman has said, we need to make sure that our charter makes sense. And then my charge to all of us is to make sure that the changes that we make in the interest of democracy and not in the interest of politics. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, I'd like to follow up on that too, and I think that's those are great statements. It's a balancing act. From my view, it's a balancing act. You know, at the end of the day, we have to have an effective government, and we have to get things done. We can't bog down in process. On the other hand, process is needed, especially democratic processes are needed. So ultimately, I think the goal here is to find a balance between being able to get the work done and also paying allegiance to those democratic processes. So for me, it's always a balancing act. As I was trying to express, probably not too well the last time, my view about the city charter is that we have so much process, we have so much bad organization, and essentially a lot of provisions in our charter that slow down effectiveness of our government. So I would like to cut, but I don't think we have to be careful about where that might be. But I am mindful of the sentiments that are expressed about the democratic process. We have to always have allegiance to those, but it's a balancing act in my world.
Yeah.
Other views? Matt?
Yeah, thanks, Victor. I think you already touched on the one thing, but I did want to, in terms of adopting a council manager system of government, you already touched on this, but this making that change, and this isn't necessarily an argument for or against it, but would really put the city of Baltimore out of step with our peer jurisdictions throughout the state, and with the way kind of the state itself is structured, where you have a strong executive with an independent legislative branch. I think we're the city of Baltimore, but for all intents and purposes, we really do operate as Maryland's 25th county. And, I think, again, it really would put us out of step with some of the other jurisdictions around the state. In terms of selection of the council president from at large among the members, just one thing I would note for the discussion on that. The actual powers of the council president, as they exist in the city charter, are fairly limited. It is to preside over the body, to vote as a member of the body, and to perform other duties that may be prescribed in law. So there is a lot of power that has accumulated to that office, but that is power that's accumulated to that office either as a function of the council rules or through ordinance. So if we're just talking about the structure of the charter, the president is elected at large among the voters of the city, but in terms of some of the sort of the mechanics of how governing actually gets done, there is a lot of accountability built in both through the council rules and as various ordinances have been adopted over time. So just another point for discussion. I don't know that I would be in favor of either change personally.
Let me say that it's an interesting point, though, that the council president, if you look in the charter, doesn't have much authority, but yet he wields tremendous authority over the city council because I think of more, from my view, probably budgetary matters. And then people follow a line from the budgetary matters. You can also appoint committees, but a lot of that stuff's not in the charter. And so it's really interesting about how, when you talk about the president's power, whether it should be in the charter, because certainly it is a compositional aspect of our government. But how to anchor it in the charter is a tough game to play. Other comments that we have, Richard? I want to make sure before we get to staff, I want to make sure we've got the comments from the commissioners.
I'll wait my turn, Victor.
And I'm going to be interested to hear what you have to say, Richard, because you've been around forever here, and I know you know where all the bodies are.
Okay, well, that's an important point on elected by the members. Okay, this is my fifth charter revision commission, going back Frank Murnahan, Al Faginski, Harry Cole, and it was all a serious idea on all of them. And when it got mentioned council, the message came back, don't even send that up here because we're not going to pass it. It's not going to get on the ballot, and you're going to get embarrassed. So just generally, what I would say to the commissioners are got to consider that if what you're going to recommend to the council is going to pass. And is a point that you want to make important enough that you'll send up a
Yeah, we didn't hear the last piece, but I think we understood where you're going on that. I mean, we don't want to, we need to be careful about what we're suggesting, but I guess at the end of the day, we'll have to figure out what we really want to get behind. And if we're all for it, well, if it's going to die in council, it dies in council. But that's something we'll be talking about.
That's all I've got.
I saw. Do we have others? I just saw a chat, but I didn't. I'm missing it. So
that was me in chat, but I wanted to hear from others before I responded, if that's okay.
Absolutely. Comments, other comments about the items on the table here? Looks like you're on, Doctor.
Well, thank you, and I want to appreciate everyone's comments. Also, especially that they may be in opposition. On the council president piece, I wanted to definitely explain though that there was no intention in my presentation of this to be seen as robbing individuals of democracy. Because we vote for an office, it doesn't necessarily mean that that office can function well or does not ensnag or change power dynamics in such a way that they're beneficial to all of the people of a city. My thought on the point about and the concern that you raised, Reverend Litter, which I really, really do appreciate and I take to heart and I'll think about tonight, is my thought on this was that it would not rob a majority Black city of power, but in fact, perhaps enhance it. I see that most of the districts, and I think a large majority of the districts in our city are majority Black, and that those majority citizens speaking through their districts throughout the city may find that their opinions and their needs of their district as shared with their city council member ultimately can run into a roadblock with one additional barrier between them and the mayor. And that's how it's been described to me at times by people on city council as I've spoken with members in the past, is that not only do they have to take the values and the views of the citizens of their district forward, but they have to convince the council president, who's not elected by them, but is elected by the citizens and not beholden in any way to the council members, have to convince him. And then after that, would have to then find some way to convince the mayor in that process to go, so that it becomes an extra structural barrier for individual citizens speaking through their individual members to get the things done in West Baltimore, East Baltimore, Northeast Baltimore, Northwest Baltimore, etc. And so again, Reverend, super much appreciate what you're saying, but I just wanted to let everyone know there was not a bit of intention in my mind that this was an idea of changing power dynamics in the city from the Black majority of our citizens, but in fact, perhaps even enhancing that power is the way I saw this particular move. Versus in this particular case, a situation, and I'm not saying Council President Mosby does not represent the city. I'm not. I'm saying that having three layers of power to get something done makes it difficult for citizens to speak through their individual council members and speak in a way that allows them to direct their energies to a legislative piece that might actually pass and or not be vetoed in this case. So anyway, that was my intention. But if my intentions were flawed, I leave it to the wisdom of the committee. So thank you. And I really appreciate y'all hearing me out. I really do.
Dr. Hartley, I certainly can't speak to your specific intent, but I can talk about what the impact is. And as I placed in the chat, inherently a council president elected every year is weaker than a council president elected by all people with a mandate from the people. Just because there is a process doesn't mean that it's a barrier to getting things done. All legislative bodies have processes, and what we elect council people to do is to pass legislation and to provide oversight. It is the executive branch that is responsible for getting things done. Council members can bring these things that need to get done to the attention of the executive branch, but that's really not their role. What I have suggested, because you don't know what you don't know and you can't see what you can't see, is that people find a way to develop a power equity lens or a racial equity lens. And there's lots of material out there to help us to get to those places where we can consider the things that we haven't considered before. The idea that we have 3 citywide elected officials for our city government is an important part of developing a pipeline for preparing political leaders. And when you reduce that number, you reduce the pipeline, you make it smaller, which again also makes the government and the processes by which we elect our government less democratic. But I don't want to take up any more time on this issue, but I think that these are healthy and important conversations that we should have because they speak to the heart of what it means to build an inclusive democracy. You know, it is unfortunate and quite interesting that even though the vast majority of the appointing powers for this commission are Black, we still have a white majority on this commission. And this commission has to reckon with that. We all have to reckon with that. And we have to reckon with the ways politics are used, even by Democrats in democratic governments, are used to subvert the power of the people. So, Mr. Chairman and commissioners, I'm grateful for you hearing me out. I have another meeting that I have to attend to, so I'm going to be taking my leave now.
I just have a point to make about the appointment of this commission before the Reverend leaves. This commission is appointed by members of the city council and by all 3 citywide elected officials. The representation reflected in this commission is the exact choice of the elected members of the city of Baltimore.
Yeah, and it's problematic because there has not been a sufficient attempt. Look, if the city is 2/3 Black, why shouldn't the commission be 2/3 Black? That's not a position that anyone can say is a bad position, especially when for decades, I mean, and I'm being nice by saying decades instead of centuries, for a very long time, women and people of color had no representation in city government. And so now we're at the point where we are advancing democracy, where we have to be super intentional about creating equity. So it's not at all, an insult to you, Ben, or an insult to the appointing authorities. But it is, I mean, after all, I'm the one who said the vast majority of the appointing authorities are Black, and we still ended up with a white majority on this commission. That's something that we need to talk about. It's not something that we should dismiss, because the inequity in how our city government operates comes at a very high cost. And that high cost we have seen manifest as over-policing. That high cost we've seen manifest as redlining. That high cost we've seen manifest in all ways that create dividends or penalties for this city that are not sustainable. So please don't be defensive. If we can't talk about race and inequity in Baltimore, then God save our country.
I agree with you, Reverend, that it's a point of conversation. I just wanted to make sure that we were also being honest with who everybody that is appointed on this board was specifically chosen by those members. And the comment
how
did not
could you
seem
not
to
think that I
suggest
was
that
being honest
context.
about that? How could you not think I was being honest about that when I said the majority of the appointing authorities are African American? I said that before anybody else.
Let's, I mean, I think we've got the views on the table and they're worthwhile listening to. And I think we will come back to this topic again. But let's move on. I think we've at this moment, I think we're good on this. Now, we do have now, do we have other members of the commission?
I think maybe it would be useful before we get into specific areas, to maybe have a conversation as a subcommittee about kind of what it. Oh, it's going to take many minutes. Thank you for asking. No, oh, come on. Sorry. Hopefully, it won't actually take many minutes. Hey, come on. This is a public meeting here. Sorry about that. I think it might be useful to have a conversation just about what we think the actual role and purview of at least the subcommission, but I mean, kind of the whole exercise of the charter review, but what we think the scope is, because I think, in terms of what the final work product that we're going to put forward is, can kind of run the whole gamut from small cleanup administrative kind of changes to, real reimaginings of the structure of city government. And maybe we should have a shared understanding of what we're trying to do.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, and it's one that I've sort of struggled with as chair. We don't have direction from anybody in city government at this point. They haven't really said what they would like us to look at. So when you have a commission like this, as you point out, Matt, we can go for big items, we can go for small items. The constraint here is that big items take a while to convince people that they should happen, and we've got 5 months, and it's a tough thing to pull together. On the other hand, if an idea is really fruitful enough, if it really does have power, we should be, and we're not afraid to bring it. We should bring it we should bring it to the powers that be. At the end of the day, we can only recommend to the city council, mayor and city council, that we have items that we think would be great to consider as charter amendments. And they'll figure out whether or not whether they are interested enough to take it on. But it is something that we should be dealing with. And I think we will. I mean, one of my ideas is like, well, let's have 3 big ideas that can come from this commission. But I don't think that's reasonable on its face, because I think people have ideas and they would like to have, that's why you're on the commission, to basically put those ideas forward. And I think a lot of these ideas are going to be good. So I think we're going to be struggling with this. Like, for example, the ones that you've just put at Dr. Hartley are really good. I think we want to, we can't decide them today, but I think we want to come back and iron them out and have more debate now that they're on the table. And ultimately, as a committee, decide whether or not we want to have language from legislative reference to put those in operation, and whether we want to vote them out. We're sort of making this up as we go, and this is our committee. We can do it the way we want to do it. And I'm chair, but I want to listen to whatever your views are about any of this material. Comments at this point? Dr. Hartley.
Yeah, Matt, that was a really great question. I guess the way I saw it too is it is a good opportunity to potentially clean up language, but then I started thinking about the fact that some of the ways that the charter has been changed in the past and even recently have come from other directions. Petitions circulated from, I'll just be honest, moneyed interests from outside the city. And what makes this commission, and I think really kind of cool, is you have a group of citizens, and we have an opportunity to do it now, whether they go anywhere or not. And anyway, that's the way I saw it. But on the other hand, it's there's a lot that could be done or not be done too.
Wonderful. Okay. if we have no more comments on this, I want to go to Andy Ellis, who has an interesting proposition that he's interested in presenting as a member of the commission. Not particularly our committee, though. But have I cut off anybody in the commission who would like to speak before we move on to Andy's suggestions? All right. Seeing none. Mr. Ellis, you are on.
Thank you. Can I share? Does the button work?
I think you can, although I don't know how that operates.
Whether it was going to be. Okay, so can you see the screen that says the referendum?
You can.
Okay, excellent. So the proposal that I'm offering today is the referendum. I'm not going to go through all of this, but I put together a resource that I think was useful for me in taking notes about this and helping to compare different charters across the state of Maryland. So broadly, the referendum is the principle or practice of submitting to popular vote a measure passed on or proposed by a legislative body or by a popular initiative. And we find this in the Maryland Constitution. The people reserve themselves the power known as the referendum by a petition to have submitted to the registered voters of the state to approve or reject at the polls an act of the General Assembly. So I would say that so referendum in Maryland, all the other charter counties have the power of referendum in Maryland, and I will show below there's a table that has how they do it. There's a couple of things that each of these charters has that defines how the referendum is used. There's a scope of referendum, and it explains which laws passed by the council are subject to the referendum. It makes some exclusions, oftentimes including appropriations, taxation, and redistricting. The next thing that each one of them has is an amount of petition signatures required to send an act to the voters. And in every case, except a few, this is a percentage, and it is a percentage of a certain number of voters, either all registered voters in the county, those that participated in one of the most recent statewide elections. It also has a window of time in which the petition must be filed, and this always matches a clause in the charter about the time, the specific date of enactment for any bill passed by referendum. So in Montgomery County, for example, all legislation passed by the council takes effect 91 days after the date when it becomes law, and the petition for referendum must be submitted within 90 days. It also, often they also specify the form of the petition. And you can see here Anne Arundel County specifies the form of petition as paper and talks about the ordinance being on it. I will make a note on this one that during 2020 COVID state of emergency, the State Board of Elections authorized the collections of signatures for other petition processes via electric means. A federal court upheld that, and there's also legislation in the General Assembly this year to allow electronic signatures. So I would highly recommend that if we do go forward with this in the charter, we don't specify a form of the petition so that if the General Assembly or the executive branch at the state level changes it, we don't have to change the charter in order to accommodate it. Montgomery County does it this way. They don't specify a form of the petition. I also provided here a table that lists what the signature threshold is, what a percentage is, and the submission window for every other charter county in the state of Maryland. And then down here, I provided the charter language for each of those. Now, I double checked and I made the list and I checked it twice. But if I got anything wrong in here, it is a reference that I'm sharing for the purposes of the discussion. At the end of the day, more than 3 million voters who live in 10 other charter counties have this power. Baltimore City is the only charter county equivalent that does not. And at the very least, this amendment would give Baltimore City residents the same rights and powers to democracy as the rest of the charter counties have. At best, it would give us a tool to make the Baltimore City government better and more responsive to the people. And so that is what I have, and then I'm open to questions, concerns, or scathing criticisms.
Let me be real clear about what we're talking about. We're talking about putting something for referendum before it becomes law, before it's, we have an enactment, we have the passage of an ordinance or a law, and there's a gap between when it takes effect. And in the gap, that's when a petition can be submitted by the voters of so many percentages of the voters. And then it would be referred to the voters at the next election, and whether the voters determine whether it goes forward or not, that's the end of the game. So it's in the gap that this occurs. Now, that the reason why it's in the gap is because the voters can't make legislation. We can block it, but we can't make it. So we can't already, the law can't already be in effect. It can only be in that gap between the passage and when it does take effect. So that's essentially what we're talking about. And as Andy mentioned, if you look on his material, there are cutouts, things you can't take to referendum, things like bond issues, things like that. But for the most part, most of it is available in most counties for this referendum provision. So discussion?
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
Would this be additional language to section 14, passage of ordinances and resolutions, or would this be a change of language? And I apologize if it was in your materials, Andy, and I missed that.
I don't have a particular expectation of how it should be put into the Baltimore Charter, but I did include the charters of the other counties so that you can see.
Yeah, so we would leave that up to, ultimately, we'd leave it up to legislative reference to draft up what they think would be the best shot, and we would take a look at it and see what we think. Kathy?
Yeah, the form of petition now can be electronic, right?
It can't. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Kathy, and then I'll answer.
No, I was just wondering if it can be electronic, is there any place where we can look up or understand like safeguards to data and, against manipulation and things of that nature?
Yeah, sure. And this is a topic I could talk at significant length about, but I won't. In 2020, the State Board of Elections passed a emergency ordinance that allowed there to be regulations around how they handle the safeguarding of that data. That was dependent on the state of emergency that Governor Hogan signed. When the state of emergency lapsed, they took that away. The piece of legislation that is before the General Assembly this year, sponsored by Delegate Ruth and Senator Carter, would allow the State Board of Regulations to the State Board of Elections to come up with regulations about how those electronic signatures would be handled if they were permitted by the General Assembly. So all of that to be said, there is a lot of focus and concern about the safety and trustworthiness of electronic signatures, and the State Board of Elections would be responsible, if any legislation were to pass, to come up with regulations sufficient to the General Assembly to meet those needs. Does that address your question?
Yes.
Kathy?
Okay. Thank you.
Matt?
Andy, I think I know the answer to this, but as a functional matter, can you explain how this would be, legislatively speaking, how this would be substantively different from the process for petitioning items to the ballot by referendum that exists presently?
Well, there's no provision for Baltimore City ordinances to be petitioned.
Well,
there is in the other charter counties. But so there's none. That it would be different because there's none, and this would add it.
Yeah.
Now, the difference between initiative and referendum. So, like, we do have the power to make charter amendments by petition process, and that is to add things. This would be about legislation, not about the charter.
Right. So we don't have, just to be clear, we don't have.
That was the distinction I was looking for. Thanks.
Terrific. We don't have, just for those who don't know, we don't have the right unlike what they have in the Northeast, where places have the ability, the voters have the ability to create legislation by petition, we don't have that here in Maryland. That's called the initiative. It comes up all the time. People want it, and we don't have it. So, and we can't give ourselves that power. What we can have is, as we just discussed, we can insert by petition charter changes, but we can't change laws already in effect. That can only be done by a legislative body.
Okay.
Richard? Can't hear you.
How's that? Can you hear me now?
Better? Yep.
Okay. It may be an idea to check with Hillary and the law department to see if enabling statute from the legislature before we go down that road.
Yeah, absolutely. This has to be referred to the law department for whatever views they have on this thing. So we're hopeful because we've got every charter county in Maryland has it, but we don't know whether Baltimore City is often a unique little entity, and we may not have that authority, but we'll have the law department check that out.
We're now getting to the point after 100, the ability to run a police department. So we've always been an orphan.
All right, we have more discussion on this particular point. Okay, seeing none at this point. Well, anybody who would like to suggest any changes? Now this is open every time we meet. People in this commission may have things that they would like to present that are not necessarily presented here. And we're open to those ideas as long as we're operating. So if you have ideas, and especially when you start going through Article 3, you may have more ideas. There's a lot of stuff there that may trigger some ideas about changes. So we've got just a few minutes. I think we've got about 15 minutes or so, and then I think I don't know if we still have members of the public on. Do we, Ben, do we still have people on the members of the public on?
Yes.
Okay.
Chanel Cole, and if she's muted, I don't know if she's still here. And we have 2 call-ins.
Okay, wonderful. We're gonna wait for that. If you can just remind me if I don't see it myself. At 7:45, we'll open up for public comment, and we'll take 15 minutes of public comment and see what we can do with that. But what I want to do now, because it's on the agenda, is start walking through Article 3, and this is what I'd like to do. It's not a long article, but every time we meet until we're out of this, I just want to read some and have a discussion about any points that might come up, any questions that might come up. I know I think Hillary's still on, but we certainly have a couple of city lawyers on, and they can answer any questions that we may have that may arise. So if you go to your charter, Article 3, it's on page 1. It's on my page 130. And we'll start with, and I hate the idea that I'm reading it, so bear with me. Well, maybe we can assign that later, or just give it to staff who may have better reading thing than I do. But anyways, Section 1, Legislative Department Qualifications and Salary of Members. The Legislative Department of the city shall be called the City Council, which shall consist of a single chamber. And as we read, if there's discussions, people want to stop, think about it a little bit, let me know. Qualifications. Members of the City Council, except the President, whose qualifications are provided for in Section 3, shall be citizens of the United States, at least 18 years old, and registered voters of Baltimore City. They also shall be residents of the districts the members have been chosen to represent for at least 1 year preceding their election, except as provided in Section 7E and during their term of office. Thank you for wrapping it up. Salaries. The salaries of each member shall be as provided in Article 7, Sections 117 through 125 of the Charter. Are there any comments on Section 1? Okay. Hearing none, we'll go to members. Section 2, election and term. The voters shall elect the members of the City Council on the Tuesday next after the first Monday in November of 2016, and on the same day and month in every succeeding fourth year. Their term of office shall commence on the Thursday next after the first Monday, in December, succeeding their election, and shall continue for 4 years. Number. The council shall consist of 14 members in addition to the president. There shall be 14 districts with 1 member elected from each district. The districts of each member shall be held by council. The districts of each member shall be held by council districts. The election shall be held by council districts, and no person is entitled to vote for any member of the city council other than the member for the district in which the voter is registered. Removal. The city council by 3/4 vote of its members may remove an individual member from office for incompetency, misconduct in office, willful neglect or duty, or felony or misdemeanor in office on charges preferred by the mayor, the city council committee on legislative investigations, or by the inspector general. And after notice of those charges and on opportunity to be heard by the city council are given to the individual member. There's a lot in there. Term limit. A member of the city council shall not hold office for more than 2 consecutive full terms of office, and in no event shall hold the office for more than 8 years during any 12-year period. This provision shall not preclude an elected member from seeking other elected offices within Baltimore City after 2 consecutive terms as member. In the event that an elected member takes office as a result of removal or vacancy, as described in sections 2 or 6 of this article, that elected member shall only be eligible to hold the office for the remainder of the predecessor's unexpired term and 1 consecutive full term thereafter. Any questions, comments, thoughts about section 2?
Victor?
Yeah.
Sorry. Can we go back to 1? I just had a question about, I guess, residency in a district. Do we have any instances where a council member did not live in the district which he or she represented?
That's really, that's a loaded question. Maybe staff should answer that rather than me.
Yeah, Victor, I can help you on that.
Yeah.
There have been allegations that the member lived outside the district, but basically, they refer them to the election board, and if they qualify to register to vote in that district, that pretty much ends the discussion. Now, there's a process when they're first elected. The council appoints a credentials committee to make sure they are in compliance with the charter, but they make them show the voter's card and a driver's license, but that's as far as it's gotten. I don't think there's anybody qualified from the council for being on a few state office in the city who were bumped. But if anybody wants to talk to me about that offline, I'll be glad to tell you what I know.
Okay. Thank you. No, that's good. I know you can redistrict people out of their district. You know, we redistrict every 10 years. You can redo that, and there's some provision somewhere, and I don't know where it is in here. I can't remember where it is, but that makes that not problematic. I think
the 1 year doesn't apply if you get moved into another district.
You've been moved into another district. Thanks, Richard. When we talk about, does anybody have? You know, let me tell you. It's my own view in any of this in this entire article. I've always thought that 15-member council is an albatross. It's big. It's large. It's hard. It's hard to. And I know if Reverend Little was here, he'd be talking about the democratic process. But for me. If anybody wanted to suggest knocking it down to 9 members, 6 members voted by district and 3 members voted at large, to me, it would be a better working organization. I'm mindful when I was in grad school, and I did go to grad school. When I was in grad school, I did spend a lot of time on the effectiveness of organizations. And what I learned was that the optimal size for a working body is 5. So when we get into numbers much greater than that, I worry about how effective it is. And if you've ever worked in a large body, you know how difficult it can be. I'm not going to suggest it, but I did want to sort of mention it to me. And I know from time to time we do have proposals to reduce the size. It used to be, I think, 6 members. And then they kicked it up to, at this point, 14 districts. And I know from time to time, at least I've seen something, maybe in the last term, I can't remember, where somebody was talking about maybe 9 districts, 6 districts, not quite certain. But once again, my idea, as usual, is just trying to be efficient, just trying to make the thing work better than it does. I'm not going to propose it as something.
Victor, and maybe this is the same point Richard's about to make, but I think you may be thinking about the former composition of the council for a very, very, very long time before moving to single member districts was it was a smaller number, I think 6 or 7, but multi-member. There was a number of 3-member council districts, and I think relevant to some of the discussion earlier, my understanding, and again, I would defer to folks who have a longer living memory of the council's operations than I, but my understanding is that part of the change to single member districts from the multi-member districts was to increase the minority representation on the council. So I just, I think.
Well, I wasn't aware of that.
It should be something that we,
Yeah, like I said, I'm not gonna stand on that hill and try to drive that. So it's just an efficiency thing that I always think about when I think about the council.
Okay.
No, I just wanted to. I think I don't know that the total number of members has shifted significantly over time, but the number of districts certainly has. And I think again that was an intentional choice, and times may have changed, but that's just something to think about.
Thank you. Richard?
Yeah. First of all, the previous question, the section you're looking for is Article 3, Section 7D. You can't lose your seat by being redistricted unless you move out of the city.
Great.
Now,
go ahead.
Okay, member of the council told 3 cycles ago, it was 19 members, 6 districts, 3 members per district, and the council president at large. and we were really reluctant to redistrict. In fact, after Baker versus Carr, instead of redistricting for population changes, they added extra members in the 3rd and 5th districts. So until the 70 charter, it was 21 members.
Wow, that's a crowd.
Now,
Yep.
oh, you haven't heard anything yet. Until 1925, the council was bicameral.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
The upper house sat in what's now the chambers, and that was by the one member per 6 districts, and the lower house was by ward, the 27 wards in the 27 election wards, 1 member each, and some of them were very tiny. They sat in what's now the current room. So the total population was 33. And the interesting thing, I would mention this to Reverend Level before he left, but there were actually African Americans on the council from 1890 to 1929 because they would get elected in a couple of the very small wards on the west side. When it went to 6 times 3, they eventually all lost their seats until the middle 50s.
Thank you, Richard. That's really good information. I know you're the compendium of these things, and they're worthwhile listening to. Hillary, you popped in. Did you want to say something, or are you just sort of showing us your face?
To just, mention I'm still here if there are questions. Obviously, Richard handled the last one about where in the charter was you can't be kind of redistricted out. But if you have any other, staff questions, I'm here.
Thank you, Hillary. Comments about anything else before we move on to the president's office on section 3? Okay, section 3, elections, qualifications, duties. At the same time as they elect the members, the voters shall elect from Baltimore City at large a person to be the president of the city council, who shall possess the qualifications required for the mayor of the city. It shall be the president's duty to preside over the city council, vote on all questions, and perform all other duties as may be prescribed by law. The salaries of the president shall be set in the ordinance of estimates. So I think I raised it earlier. Where did we get the powers of the president? Well, he's supposed to be presiding over the city council, whatever that might mean, in all operations and perform all such duties as may be prescribed by law. So I guess that's pretty much, as far as I can tell, it about the duties of the president. Removal. The city council, by 3/4 vote of the members, may remove the president of the city council from office for incompetency, misconduct in office, willful neglect of duty, or felony or misdemeanor in office on charges preferred by the mayor, the city council, committee on legislative investigations. A verified petition signed by at least 20% of the qualified voters in Baltimore City or by the inspector general. After notice of those charges and an opportunity to be heard by the city council are given to the president. What I thought was interesting by this particular thing is that in this case, the petition of the voters can also prefer charges, but we don't have that for members of the city council. So it's kind of unique here for the president. I'm not certain what the history might that be, unless somebody knows, but that's just an interesting difference between the two, unless I'm missing something.
I think that mirrors a similar provision as relates to the mayor, but I could be, again,
You think, and so it just, they're just trying to build in because ultimately this person may end up being mayor. Maybe they're just trying to, but you would think that if the voters can get one, they can get the other. But that's That's what we have.
Yeah, I think that's maybe related to the distinction between, them being a citywide elected official like the mayor as opposed to being elected on a district level. But I couldn't speak. I couldn't speak to the history, but I know they kind of run in parallel.
Yeah, makes sense. Term limit. The president of the city council shall not hold office for more than 2 consecutive full terms of office, and in no event shall hold the office for more than 8 years during any 12-year period. This provision shall not preclude an elected president from seeking other elected offices within Baltimore City after 2 consecutive terms as president. In the event that an elected president takes office as a result of a removal or vacancy described in sections 3 or 4 of this article, that elected president shall only be eligible to hold that office for the remainder of the predecessor's unexpired term and 1 consecutive full term thereafter. And I know that there is, we do have introduced in the city council already term limit repeal of term limits for the mayor, the comptroller, city council president, and council members. That is before our committee, at least in terms of the repeal of the term limits for city council members. We'll be dealing with that at another time at this point. And finally, just the last one we're going to read is vacancies in the presidency. If it becomes necessary for the president of the city council to fill the unexpired term of the mayor, or in case of death, resignation, removal, or other disqualification of the president, the city council, by a majority vote of its members, shall elect a new president for the unexpired term. The person so elected as president may, but need not, be at the time of election a member of the city council. Comments about anything we've read so far? Okay. So now it is close enough to 7:45, and I want to open it up to any public comment about what they've heard or what they would like the committee to hear. So could you please open up the phone lines?
I am attempting to unmute Chanel Cole.
I don't have any comments.
Well, thank you for being here, Chanel. We appreciate the participation. Even if you don't have any comments, it's nice that you're listening in. Thank you.
And that is one phone call left.
And that's it in terms of public attendance. Michael Wells, again, is from Charm TV. So.
Okay, great. Well, I think at this point, do we have any unfinished business here for this evening?
Victor, can you call me sometime tomorrow? I want to talk about the form of the.
Sure. Okay. And at some point, we're going to have a transcript of this. We're going to have it on recorded or something like that, so we can take a look at that if we need to.
Okay.
I'll call you tomorrow, Richard. I guess I've got your phone number. If you don't, you've got mine, so we can chat. Okay.
I'll text it to you tomorrow. I'll give you my cell in case I'm away from the desk.
Okay, that works for me.
Okay.
Any other comments before we adjourn? Okay. Seeing none, hearing none, we are adjourned. Thank you very much for attending.
Exactly 7:45.
Thank you.
Yep. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thanks, everybody. Bye.